He turns out it takes just 10 minutes to marry someone. Walking out of the marriage bureau, Richard stared at the little red booklet in his hand, feeling a bit dazed. He was really married, and not to his fiancée, Jenny, but to a stranger he'd known for less than a week. "Sorry, Richard. This mission came up suddenly. Can we have our wedding ceremony a month from now?" The clear, apologetic voice next to him drew Richard's gaze to her. Under the setting sun, the woman had striking and delicate features. Her fair skin made her seem all the more spirited. Her posture was upright, calm when still, and like an unsheathed sword when in motion, unstoppable, definitely a soldier's stance. This was his new wife, Annie. "It's okay," Richard nodded understandingly. "Your mission is important." Annie smiled slightly and gave Richard a gentle hug, then said, "Let's stick to our plan. We'll have the ceremony in City C a month later. I'll come back for you once I finish the mission." In the blink of an eye, she was gone before Richard could react. After taking a minute to accept the fact he was married, Richard put the marriage certificate into his bag and took a cab home. The house was still empty. Ignoring it, Richard went straight to the master bedroom to pack his things. He'd had a marriage arrangement with Jenny since childhood. Living at her place had made sense, but now married to someone else, he knew he should leave. Just as he found his suitcase, a questioning voice came from the doorway. "Where are you going?" Richard looked up and saw Jenny standing there, tired lines on her pretty face. Rubbing her forehead, she said, "Richard, I've been busy. Can't you stop with these leave-home drama stunts? I don't have time for them." It was the same thing every time they talked, like she was making an effort just to fit him into her schedule. He was really leaving, but she just thought he was acting out. Richard saw no point in explaining, his eyes down as he folded clothes. "The hospital's sending me to City B for a bit. Just getting ready." Realizing she misunderstood, Jenny paused, her tone softening slightly. "City B is colder. Bring warm clothes." Watching Richard sort through his clothes, Jenny hesitated but spoke. "Richard, I'm bringing Michael and his son to live here. Tommy needs his residency registered under my name. They're alone in each country, and they've done me great favors before." She could barely finish before Richard cut in. "I don't mind. Go ahead." He was about to leave, so whoever else moved into this house didn't concern him anymore. Michael and his son Tommy had saved Jenny's life and done big favors for her company, too. 6 months ago, Jenny had gone missing due to a terrorist attack on a business trip in Country M. She reappeared at her grandpa's 70th birthday a month ago, bringing Michael and his son along. That day, with all the H-Town elites gathered, she introduced another man as her savior, making Richard look like a joke. Afterward, she said she was merely grateful to Michael for saving her and keeping company secrets safe, but Richard could tell her looks at Michael weren't innocent, the deep affection evident. Before, he'd act like a lion guarding his territory, blocking Michael. Now he wouldn't. Jenny hadn't expected Richard to agree and seemed a bit surprised. Happy with his compromise, Jenny softened and said, "Don't worry, Richard. Once Michael settles here and finds a job, they'll move out." Richard was uninterested in Michael's affairs and changed the subject. "About our engagement." Jenny wasn't inclined to listen, cutting him off. "The company's too busy now. We'll talk marriage later." Richard tried to explain. "I didn't mean," but before he could finish, Jenny's phone rang. Her gaze softened as she answered. "Michael, what's up?" "Tommy misses me. I'll be right there." She left in a hurry, reminding Richard at the door. "Richard, have the guest room ready by tomorrow. Michael and Tommy are moving in." A click of the door, and Richard was left alone in the silence. He looked at his hand still outstretched, smiled wryly, eyes darkened. It wasn't the wedding he wanted to talk about, it was breaking off the engagement. When had Jenny stopped having the patience to listen to him? She looked at him impatiently, like talking to him was a task she disliked. But she hadn't always been like this. The Booths and the Millers families had been friends forever. Richard and Jenny grew up together with an engagement. Once the adored golden couple of H-Town, they grew up side by side, never openly expressing love, but she was always there when he turned around. She protected him, supported him like a guardian angel. They'd planned to marry once he came of age, but a car accident at 16 changed everything. His parents gone, the Booth's business taken over by greedy relatives, Richard was treated worse than a servant. In his darkest times, Jenny took him in, helped him finish school and become a doctor. After college, he thought they could fulfill the engagement and start a life together. But she got busier, inheriting the family business, always asking him to wait. Wait he did, for 6 years. Ginny went from patiently explaining to frowning any time the engagement came up. Richard thought she was just stressed. As long as she loved him, what was waiting a little longer? Then Michael appeared, shattering Richard's illusions. Ginny could meticulously take care of someone, not minding the details. Ginny could ensure someone's well-being every day, worried they'd feel slighted. These were things she never did for Richard. The ringing phone broke his thoughts, the pain sharp. Richard looked at the ceiling, holding back tears. Richard, emergency, got a ruptured hepatic hemangioma patient. All experienced surgeons are booked. If you're free, could you take it? Sure, prep them. I'm on my way, Richard replied to the call from the surgery department. Arriving at 9 p.m., the patient was critical. Richard performed a partial hepatectomy, finishing around 2 a.m. drained. He returned to his office and slept on the couch. A while later, he awoke when he felt something being draped over him. Opening his eyes, he saw the hospital director, William. Startled, Richard asked, "Did I wake you? I saw you curled up without even a blanket. Thought I'd cover you, but ended up waking you." "Oops," William said, slightly regretful. Richard wasn't bothered. "It's fine. I got enough sleep. I'll nap after rounds." William wasn't just his boss. He'd been friends with Richard's dad. He'd seen how hard Richard worked over the years, both proud and sorrowful. "Okay, finish your rounds and then rest," William smiled, heading out. Hesitant, Richard ultimately stopped him. "I need to talk, William. I'm considering resigning." William returned, shocked. "Why so sudden?" "I got married," Richard said. When William heard that, a look of realization crossed his face with a smile. "Oh, it's Jenny, right? Congrats, Richard. It's great to see your friendship turn into something more after all these years." Richard gave a little smile and didn't bother to correct William's misunderstanding. William, still excited, didn't notice Richard's hesitation. Hasn't your grandpa always wanted to see you get married? Now he can finally be at ease. The mention of his grandpa softened Richard's gaze, and this time his smile was genuine. "I hope it makes him happy too. If it weren't for his last wish for me to settle down quickly, I wouldn't have rushed into marrying Annie, who happened to also be pushed by her family to get married," Richard thought. Thinking about taking the marriage certificate to visit his grandpa next time, he hoped it would make the old man happy. After a little more chatting with William, Richard went to take care of his resignation paperwork and checked the apartment before heading home. He was exhausted from staying up late the night before without enough rest. On the way home in the cab, he felt lightheaded and just wanted to crawl into bed for a good sleep. But the moment he stepped inside his place and saw the scene in the master bedroom, all of his blood rushed to his face, and exhaustion was blasted away by anger. "Tommy, what are you doing?" He snatched the frame from the little boy's hands, and the beautiful painting was ruined by thick black pen marks. Richard felt a dark cloud take over, and his hands wouldn't stop shaking. This was the only keepsake of his mother. That painting had been with him for so many years, and now it was destroyed. Fury boiled inside him as he glared at Tommy. Before Richard could say anything, the little boy started wailing. "Uncle Richard, you're so mean. Dad, come quick. Uncle Richard's gonna hit me. I'm scared." The next moment, Michael rushed in, quickly scooping up his son into his arms to comfort him. Hey, what happened here?" A few words of appeasement later, he seemed to notice Richard, with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Richard, Tommy's just a kid. Whatever he did wrong or broke, I'll cover it. Come on, don't hold it against a child." Michael had short cropped hair, handsome features, and an air of defiance. He didn't really mean to apologize, looking instead provocatively at Richard. Richard felt a pulse throb at his temples, and he raised the ruined painting, asking sternly, "Who gave you permission to enter my room and break my stuff? You'll pay." "How?" Tommy, feeling emboldened, yapped back like a little dog behind its owner. "It's just a dumb painting. I'll ask Aunt Jenny to pay you." Greedy, mean guy. Richard, eyes red with anger, reached out to personally reprimand Tommy. Catching this from the corner of his eye, Michael suddenly gave his son a shove, causing him to hit the corner of the bedside table. "Daddy, it hurts. I'm bleeding." The sharp cry pierced through, and Tommy sat on the floor crying non-stop with a serious-looking gash on his forehead, blood running down his face. Michael immediately cradled his son, his voice concerned as he looked at Richard. "Richard, even if Tommy did upset you, Did you need to lay a hand on a child? I'm apologizing here, okay? Richard had seen clearly what Michael did, and now he didn't understand his game, but then he did. Just a moment later, Tommy. Ginny rushed in from outside in a hurry. She crouched beside Tommy and then turned an angry glare at Richard, her voice cold. Richard, Tommy is just a kid. How could you hurt him? Ginny didn't even ask for an explanation before accusing him. Richard gripped the frame in his hands, feeling his heart freeze over. The strength left his body in an instant. His throat was painfully dry, and the defense he wanted to give was stuck there. Michael, crying, started speaking up. Ginny, you can't really blame Richard. It's all our fault, mistaking his room for the guest room. We got used to living in basements back in the U, and we didn't resist choosing this room with such good lighting. Tommy messed with Richard's painting, making him mad. Michael's pitiful speech made Ginny's heart ache, and she looked at Richard with even more anger. It's just a stupid painting. Is there a need for this violence? Richard, you really have quite the temper. Apologize to Michael and Tommy. A stupid painting? That was his mother's only keepsake. Michael might not know, but didn't Ginny? Richard stared at Ginny, his fingers clutching the frame tightly. I'm not apologizing. Tommy wasn't pushed by me. Ginny got angrier, her pretty face tight. You still won't admit your fault? Michael tugged at her sleeve, saying considerately, Let it go, Ginny. Richard doesn't need to apologize. It's our bad for barging into his space. He has every right to be upset. But the more Michael said things like that, the more Ginny felt Richard's expressionless face was too much. With a clenched jaw, she said, Who says it's right to be angry? This is my house, and I won't have it run by any outsider's whims. Michael, you and Tommy can stay in the master bedroom. Richard can take the guest room. Her words cut into Richard like knives, causing him to falter. An outsider? So all these years, she saw him as just an outsider. It was all so ridiculous. Hearing Ginny say that, Michael felt a thrill inside, yet maintained a worried look. The room isn't the issue. It's just Tommy's wound is too serious. Ginny, can you come with me to take him to the hospital? Ginny didn't hesitate and quickly picked Tommy up, preparing to leave. But Richard stopped her, his face blank. Ginny, let's call off our engagement. Ginny didn't believe him at all, thinking it was just a tactic, and with a dismissive wave, she said, Come on, cut it out with these silly games. Just stay home and think about what you did. When Ginny finished speaking, she hurriedly left with Michael and his son. As soon as the door closed, Richard felt utterly drained of all his energy. He held the painting and slowly squatted down as if holding his own little world. His eyes filled with warmth that moistened his heart and made it hard to breathe, making everything go dark before him. He wasn't sure how long he sat there before his phone buzzed in his pocket. It was a friend request from Michael. Richard accepted it, but received no message back. Then a message popped up from a colleague. Hey, Richard, I've got something on social media that I need likes for. Can you help me out and give it a like? Richard exited the message and scrolled through his feed. He stumbled upon a recent post from Michael that caught his eye. It was a series of photos of Ginny sitting by Tommy's hospital bed, peeling an apple, with the caption, Thankful to have you by my side. Richard clicked in only to realize it was a live photo with the background sound on. He could clearly hear Michael and Ginny's conversation. Michael sounded a bit worried. Ginny do. Richard felt a sharp pang in his chest as he heard Ginny's cold words through the phone. You think it'll be okay with Richard? I saw him packing earlier. What if he gets mad and moves out? Michael sounded worried, but Ginny replied carelessly, almost mocking. He's just an orphan. Where else could he go? He might just run off elsewhere for surgery. I've seen this act before. Richard shut off his phone and closed his eyes, a wry smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. How pitiable he was. The moments when she once stood in front of him, protecting and supporting him, now felt like boomerangs, piercing his heart with a painful reminder of how much things had changed. During the following week, Richard drowned himself in work at the hospital and didn't return home at all. He really was swamped. Not only did he need to clear out his surgery schedule, but a major fire had also broken out in the city, drastically increasing the number of surgical patients. All the surgeons were running themselves ragged, and Richard was no exception. Great work, Richard. His co-worker nodded at him as he took off his mask and changed out of his scrubs. Before he could take a sip of water, Michael and Tommy showed up. Richard, please don't kick me and Tommy out, Michael pleaded, pulling his son to kneel in front of the desk. The young nurse, who wasn't wearing makeup that day and looked worn out, was shocked. She quickly closed the door behind her as she left. Richard remained seated at his desk, unmoved, his expression stern. "Ginny's not here. What's with this performance?" he asked icily. Michael continued sobbing, his voice full of grievance. "Richard, I know you dislike me, but I never intended to compete with you for Ginny. We don't know anyone here in H-City. We just need a place to stay temporarily. We'll leave eventually. But now you've had us thrown out of Ginny's place. How are we supposed to live?" Growing impatient, Richard retorted. Before he could finish, the phone on his desk rang. It was Ginny's grandfather calling. "Richard, are you busy?" The kind voice of the old man on the other end made Richard soften his tone. "Not really. Just finished surgery." Ginny's grandfather had watched Richard grow up and treated him like his own grandson. Richard depended on him dearly, considering him and his own grandfather as the ones who loved him most. Sensing Richard's exhaustion, her grandfather urged him not to overwork himself before getting to the point. "Richard, I've heard about what's going on between you and Ginny. Don't worry, I've dealt with that man, Michael, for you. I had my men throw his things out of Ginny's house and kicked him out. From the very start, you were meant to be my granddaughter's husband." Richard was stunned. Glancing at Michael kneeling before him, he realized it was Ginny's grandfather who had him thrown out. His heart softened with gratitude, yet his mouth tasted bitter. Clutching the phone, he remained speechless for a while until the old man sighed and pleaded, "Richard, I know Ginny's been going too far lately, but I still hope you can give her another chance. She's merely been fooled by him. Once you two marry, she'll come around. How about setting the wedding for next month?" Feeling a lump in his throat, Richard made up a random excuse and ended the call. As the screen turned black, the office door was flung open again. Ginny stormed in, rushing to help Michael and his son as soon as she saw them kneeling. When she turned to Richard, her gaze was sharp and cold. "Richard, you're not a kid anymore, and yet you're tattling? Now you get to marry me, so are you happy? This scheming of yours makes me sick." She dropped the words before storming out with Michael and his son without another glance. Richard chuckled cynically, leaning back in his chair with closed eyes. Well, so be it, he thought. He'd be leaving soon anyway. He thought his departure would mean never seeing Ginny and Michael again. But that night, Tommy was rushed into the ER, covered in blood, with Ginny and Michael by his side. All three had been in a car accident, but Tommy was the most severely injured. Michael was frantic, grabbing Richard's hand as soon as he arrived. "Richard, you have to save Tommy." As the doctor on duty, Richard couldn't refuse and went straight into surgery. It was a seemingly simple procedure, and he finished it quickly. However, after the observation period, Tommy showed no signs of waking up and remained in a coma. The next day, upon hearing the news, Richard immediately visited their room. Ginny was out, leaving Michael alone by Tommy's side. Seeing Richard, Michael's eyes reddened as he frantically accused, "Why hasn't Tommy woken up? Did you do something to him? I know you hate me, but you can't harm my son." Uncertain of the problem, Richard moved to check on Tommy, but Michael blocked his way, crying and yelling, "Enough! Don't touch my Tommy anymore. You botched the surgery on purpose. I want a new doctor. A new one." Intent on understanding Tommy's condition, Richard didn't argue and simply pressed the call button. Facing Michael, he said, "You can ask for another doctor, but you have to find out why Tommy is still in a coma. I won't take the blame for a surgical error." Once the nurse arrived, Richard ordered some tests. Take a blood sample from the patient immediately and check if there's a possibility of the patient taking medication before surgery that conflicted with the anesthesia. Before he could finish, Michael burst out in agitation. "No, I won't allow it. My son didn't take anything, and he's not sick. This is clearly your surgical error. Why draw blood from my son?" Genuine tears fell as he continued to sob. Richard watched his unnatural demeanor, sensing something wasn't right. Fixing his eyes on Michael, he questioned coldly, "Are you hiding Tommy's medical history?" Michael's eyes flickered, his voice rising defensively. "What hidden history? I'm Tommy's father. How could I harm him?" Recalling the recent incident where Michael shoved Tommy, causing a head wound, Richard's suspicion grew stronger. There was no use arguing further. The test results would reveal the truth. Richard addressed the nurse firmly, "Draw the blood." Michael gritted his teeth and moved to block. "No, you can't. I'm his guardian, and I say no." Richard restrained him, allowing the nurse to quickly draw the sample and rush out of the room. Afterwards, Michael suddenly fell to the floor as Richard released him and was then abruptly shoved aside by a much stronger force. Jenny, rushing over to help Michael, she asked, "Are you okay?" Then she turned to Richard, her eyes filled with anger. "Richard, we're in a hospital. You're a doctor. What do you think you're doing to a patient's family? Did your professionalism just get thrown out the window?" Before Richard could reply, Michael urgently tugged at Ginny's sleeve, crying, "Ginny, you have to help Tommy. He's past the observation period and hasn't woken up. This has got to be a surgical error. What if Tommy doesn't wake up?" Richard was just ordering tests to find the cause, insisting he wouldn't take the blame. "But does that mean my Tommy has to pay for his mistake and just not wake up?" Michael wailed, his voice cracking with desperation. Richard almost laughed out of sheer exasperation. "The test results will confirm everything. Just wait." "Enough," Ginny shouted, cutting him off, disappointment pooling in her eyes like a stormy sea. "Richard, I can't believe you do this intentionally. When did you become so cruel, hurting a little kid like that? You're never doing surgery again. You shouldn't even be a doctor." Richard stared at her in disbelief. "What are you talking about?" But Ginny just clung to Michael, her arms wrapped protectively around him, and called out loudly, "Assistant, take him away. He needs to reflect on his actions. With the wedding coming up, get him a leave from the hospital and deal with this mess." "Reflect on what? Why do you always believe Michael when he's clearly in the wrong?" Richard protested, his face reddening with anger. As the assistant reached out to grab him, he couldn't take it anymore and roared, "Don't touch me. I'm not leaving. I need to stay here until the test results come back. I did the surgery, and I'm not denying it." His words were suddenly cut short as a sharp pain seared through his neck, and everything faded to black. When Richard regained consciousness, he found himself locked up in Ginny's villa. Far from the city, the place was surrounded by layers of security and signal jammers, rendering his phone useless. A week into his confinement, the power suddenly went out one night. Before he could make sense of the darkness, his phone rang. He fumbled for it and answered quickly. "Richard, finally you picked up. You need to get to the rehabilitation center. Your grandfather's not doing well. Hurry. You might still see him one last time." The voice on the other end said urgently. The words hit him like a sledgehammer, and his hands began to tremble violently. He nearly dropped the phone. After hanging up, he threw on his coat and bolted out of the room. He had to see his grandfather. Rushing downstairs, he was stopped by the guards at the door. "Richard, it's Jenny's orders. You can't leave." Desperate, Richard pushed against them, his voice hoarse with panic. "My grandfather's critically ill. Let me out now." The guards exchanged a glance, but shook their heads. "We're sorry, but we can't. Try calling Jenny. If she says you can go, we won't stop you." With red-rimmed eyes, Richard frantically dialed Jenny's number, his fingers slipping on the screen. The first call went unanswered. The second call, too. On the third try, it rang a couple of times before going to the busy tone. Jenny was ignoring him. His heart plummeted, and tears welled up in his eyes. He sank to the floor, clutching the phone. "Grandpa!" He couldn't bear the thought of not seeing him one last time. Dragging himself up, he tried to rush outside again, but the guards intercepted him. "Let me go. I need to see my grandfather." Chaos erupted at the villa's entrance. Just then, the sound of a car pulling up cut through the commotion. Through his tear-blurred vision, Richard saw Jenny's grandfather step out. Unable to hold back, he broke down sobbing. "Grandpa, please, take me to see my grandfather one last time." The Miller's car raced at breakneck speed, but by the time they reached Qingshan Sanatorium 40 minutes later, it was too late. Richard ran into the ward, his heart pounding. But all he saw was a nurse gently covering his grandfather's face with a white cloth. He froze, his eyes wide with disbelief. "What are you doing? Don't cover it too high. Grandpa can't breathe if you do that," he said, his voice eerily calm, as if in a dream. Slowly, he walked over and gently pulled the cloth away. His grandfather's face came into view, still kind and gentle, but the warmth was gone. His hand, once so warm, was now cold and stiff. As a doctor, Richard knew the truth all too well, but he refused to accept it. He held his grandfather's hand against his cheek, as if trying to bring back the warmth. "Grandpa, Richard is here. Why won't you open your eyes and look at me?" But the only response was the deafening silence of the room. The young nurse couldn't bear to watch and said softly, "Your grandfather passed away about 30 minutes ago. I saw how hard you tried to get here, but maybe it was just meant to be." Before he went, the old gentleman said he hoped that his Richard would always be happy. With that, she left, giving Richard some space. A moment later, heart-wrenching screams echoed through the room. Afterwards, Jenny's grandfather helped Richard make all the arrangements for the cremation. By the time Jenny found out, the funeral was already over. She rushed to the scene, arriving just as Richard, dressed in black, was coming out. Even without makeup, he looked painfully beautiful, fragile, and on the verge of breaking. Jenny suddenly felt a pang of panic and hurried over to him. "Richard, are you okay? I didn't mean to ignore your calls. I didn't know Tommy woke up, and I was with Michael." Richard interrupted quietly. "It's fine. It's all over." The word, over, seemed to terrify Jenny. She grabbed his arm, forcing a smile. "Richard, I was wrong this time. You've always wanted to go to Elk Country to ride a hot air balloon, right? Your birthday's coming up. Let's go and have fun, okay? Right now, let's go home." Once home, Jenny couldn't rest easy. She secretly arranged for guards to watch the house, afraid Richard might leave. But Richard showed no signs of resistance. He agreed to go to Elk Country with her and busied himself with packing. 3 days later, they headed to the airport together. Looking at the 2 large suitcases Richard had packed, Jenny was a bit surprised. "Why are you bringing so much stuff?" Richard kept a calm expression. "I want to stay for a while." Jenny didn't suspect anything and smiled. "Sure, whatever makes you happy." On the way to the airport, Jenny's phone rang repeatedly, but she ignored every call. Richard noticed, but said nothing. At the check-in counter, Jenny glanced at her phone and suddenly turned pale. "Richard, something's wrong with Tommy. You go ahead to Elk Country. I'll handle it and catch up with you." With those words, she turned and disappeared into the crowd without a second glance. Richard watched her go, then pulled out a ticket for Sea City from his bag. "Goodbye, Jenny," he whispered. Just before boarding, he received a message from Michael. "Pretty angry, huh? She chose me, after all." "Angry?" Richard smirked slightly. "Not really. Who hasn't fallen for a jerk or two in their youth?" Swiftly deleting Michael's contact, Richard turned off his phone, waiting for the plane to take off. "Jenny, the bidding this time was a breeze thanks to you and me. Here's to us." Casually clinking glasses with a partner, Jenny downed her glass of wine before tugging at her collar in annoyance. Her eyes flicked to her phone screen. It was already 3:30 p.m. Richard should have landed in Elk Country by now, right? Why hasn't he messaged her to check in? Is he still mad? Jenny, frazzled, suddenly heard a ding, a message alert. Picking it up, she saw it was from Michael. "Jenny, don't drink too much at business events. Take care of yourself." The smile faded from Jenny's face for the first time. Leaving Michael's message unanswered, she excused herself to the restroom. Heading to the hallway, she was ready to call Richard when a familiar face appeared. "Jenny, eating here too, huh?" Looking up, Jenny recognized Richard's boss, William, and nodded politely. Remembering something Richard mentioned to him, William cheerfully said, "I haven't seen you around lately. Congratulations on marrying Richard. You two have been through a lot since you were kids. It's no small feat to make it to this point." Jenny was about to smile and respond when something felt off. "Married already? No way. She and Richard haven't even had their wedding yet." Feeling uneasy, Jenny forced a smile and said, "You must be mistaken. Richard and I aren't married yet." William was surprised. "Nonsense. Richard told me nearly 2 weeks ago that he got married and was leaving his job." Then it hit him, and he laughed. "Oh, maybe I misunderstood. He must be preparing for your wedding in advance." But Jenny didn't feel reassured by this explanation. She felt even more anxious. 2 weeks ago, she never agreed to marry Richard. Why did he say he was married? To whom? Why quit his job? Where is he going? Numerous questions bombarded her mind, making her heart sink into despair. Panicking, she quickly asked, "What exactly did Richard say?" Before she could finish, someone emerged from the room next door. "Hey, William, how long does it take to go to the bathroom? Hurry, everyone's waiting for you." The person said this while pulling William back inside. William gave Jenny an apologetic smile before turning to leave. Still filled with unanswered questions, Jenny stood there, feeling increasingly anxious. Too distracted to socialize, she didn't return to the room but strode out of the restaurant, telling her assistant to drive her home immediately. Jenny tried calling Richard repeatedly during the ride. "Hello? The number you've dialed is currently unavailable. After dozens of attempts, every call went straight to voicemail. Ginny clenched her teeth and sent Richard a message. Richard, haven't you reached El Country yet? Why haven't you messaged me? Are you still upset? I can explain what happened today. Please call me as soon as you see this. I'm really worried about you. Stop messing around, okay? She kept refreshing her screen, filling it with green texts, but still no response from him. Back at home, Ginny hurried to Richard's room. Richard's just traveling. That's all. Just traveling. But when she opened the door and found the room empty, with his closet stripped bare, she froze in disbelief. A thought she couldn't accept surfaced. Had he really left yet? She quickly shook her head. This had to be another of his pranks. Richard wouldn't leave her. Gritting her teeth, she told her assistant, "Find out where Richard went." Richard's plane was supposed to land at 4 p.m. It should have arrived in Sea City by 2, but a sudden snowstorm delayed the flight by 2 hours. Stepping outside, large snowflakes were still falling. Winter in H City isn't this cold, nor does it snow. Richard was wearing only a cashmere coat, and the wind pierced right through. Wow, so cold. He breathed into his hands for warmth, but before he could pull out his phone, a warm coat landed on him. "You should have dressed warmer," came a familiar voice, dispelling the surrounding chill. Richard looked up to see a vibrant red in front of him. Annie handed him a rose with a smile. "I didn't know what flowers you liked, so I got roses." Is that too cliché? The biting cold mixed with the fresh scent of roses hit his senses, as did Annie's clean presence. His heart unexpectedly softened. Richard shook his head, holding the bouquet tightly. "I really like them." Annie's lips curled into a smile. She naturally took Richard's suitcase and wrapped an arm around his shoulder. "Let's get in the car, okay? It's warm inside. Won't be so cold." Once inside, the warmth made Richard realize how numb his cheeks had become from the cold. He looked at Annie after a moment. "Thanks for picking me up." Before boarding, Richard had messaged Annie about arriving in Sea City today. Since they'd agreed she'd come to H City to get him in a month, it was better to tell her he had come early, preventing any unnecessary wait. To his surprise, Annie called minutes later asking about his arrival time and saying she would pick him up. Feeling like he'd inconvenienced Annie, making her wait so long, Richard apologized. "Today's flight delay kept you waiting, didn't it? Sorry for taking your time." Annie dismissed it with a laugh. "Waiting for my husband doesn't waste my time. I stayed warm in my car anyway." In a black turtleneck, her left hand resting lazily on the steering wheel, her gaze shifted toward him with a unique mix of elegance and kindness. Richard was momentarily stunned, hurriedly avoiding her gaze as a soft flush tinged his pale ears. What husband? Even though they were technically married, she sure got used to saying it fast. Annie enjoyed his expression but chose not to tease further, starting the car instead. "Hungry? I'll take you to eat first, then we can go home." Not knowing what Richard wanted, Annie picked a restaurant that served each city-style cuisine. After ordering, they sat across from each other in silence. For some reason, Richard felt awkward and stood to excuse himself. "I'm going to the restroom." Annie nodded with a smile. "Okay, I'll be right here." Richard left the room, feeling so awkward that he almost tripped over his own feet, forgetting his phone. Annie watched him leave. Her attention was caught by his phone ringing on the table. Someone was calling Richard. Initially uninterested in answering, the persistent calls made it clear something urgent might be up, so she decided to pick up. "Hello." Silence followed, so Annie asked again. "Hello." Finally, the angry voice of a woman came through. "Who are you? Where's Richard? Why are you answering his phone?" The woman's demanding tone was irritating, so Annie narrowed her eyes coolly. "I'm his wife. Who are you?" As she spoke, she noticed Richard at the room entrance. She handed him the phone. "Your phone kept ringing. I answered in case it was urgent." Seeing the caller ID, Richard's eyes widened in surprise. Meeting Annie's gaze, he found himself at a loss for words. Some things couldn't be explained in a few sentences, but as his wife, Annie had every right to know. Yet, where should he even begin? Understanding his hesitation, Annie gently placed the phone back into his hand, offering a reassuring smile. "Whatever it is, we can talk about it later. Take the call now. If you don't want me to hear, I'll step outside." With that, she turned to leave, but Richard reached out and stopped her. Meeting her startled eyes, he said, "There's nothing you can't hear." Then, he put the call on speaker. Jenny's shrill voice came through loud and clear. Richard took a deep breath. What do you want? What's with the delay, Richard? There was a hint of relief in Jenny's voice at first, but it quickly turned somber. Where did you go? Why haven't you returned my calls? And who was that woman? I sent you so many messages, and you didn't answer. Are you still throwing a tantrum? Her tone escalated into a near scream by the end. Even through the phone, Richard could vividly picture Jenny's irritated expression, as if she was annoyed at having her precious time wasted on what she considered unimportant matters. A fleeting sense of irony washed over him, but it failed to stir any real emotions within. In a calm voice, he said, Jenny, I got married. The woman who answered is my wife. Jenny could hardly believe her ears, thinking he was playing some kind of cruel joke. Her tone softened as she tried to explain. Richard, drop the act. I know you're upset that I left you today, but Michael and I are nothing more than friends. I'm just grateful to him since he saved my life. You're my future husband. Can't you just be a bit more accepting? I'm not joking, Jenny, Richard said firmly. Seriously, I'm on my honeymoon with my wife. Please don't call. Jenny was losing her patience and raised her voice again. Richard, is this just a ploy to get my attention? Just then, Susan's voice came through in the background. Jenny, I found Richard's flight details. The sound of papers rustling could be heard, and Jenny seemed to calm down slightly. Are you in City C now? Wait for me. I'll find you and talk in person. Still convinced Richard was just trying to get her attention, she started lecturing him. Richard, I'm tired of your games. Using marriage as an excuse for you and William to leave your jobs is childish. Do you think I would believe you married someone else? You're an orphan. Who else would marry you but me? She paused, suddenly realizing she'd crossed a line, and quickly tried to backtrack. Richard, that's not what I meant earlier. But Richard didn't want to listen anymore. He hung up the phone and blocked her on all platforms. His heart was pounding wildly. He looked down, trying to steady his breathing, his hands clenching into tight fists on his knees. 6 years of waiting, and he'd finally heard Jenny's true thoughts. So, because he was an orphan with no family to rely on, she thought she could treat him poorly and drag out their engagement? All those excuses from the past weren't genuine at all. She believed he'd never leave because no one else would want him. The realization was sickening. How had the sweet girl he once knew turned into someone so cold-hearted? His body began to shake, and a wave of nausea washed over him. His vision darkened, and he nearly fell from his chair. But instead of hitting the ground, he felt a warm, strong hand grip his shoulder and pull him into a comforting embrace. Are you okay? Do you need to go to the hospital? Annie asked, her voice filled with concern. Richard leaned into her, knowing she must be wearing a worried expression even without looking. His new wife was so different from Jenny. The anger that had been boiling inside him slowly began to dissipate. He slowly sat up and shook his head at Annie. I'm fine. Maybe just a bit of low blood sugar. He hesitated for a moment before adding. The person who called was my ex-fiancée. She doesn't know about our marriage yet. After explaining everything, Richard looked at Annie, anxiously waiting for her reaction. Their marriage had been a hasty solution to family pressure. If she felt deceived and wanted a divorce, he wouldn't blame her. Annie looked serious, holding his gaze for a long, intense moment. Richard's heart tightened in his chest, but then she simply asked, Do you still have feelings for her? Richard was stunned by her calm question. She wasn't angry or accusatory. After a moment, he shook his head. It's over between us. But if you're concerned, he began, but Annie cut him off with a raised brow and a relaxed smile. Why would I be? It'd be odd for a man like you not to have an ex. And you've moved on now. You're my husband. Even if she tried to compete, she wouldn't stand a chance. Richard was drawn in by Annie's easygoing demeanor. Why not? He asked. Because I won't give her the chance to take you, Annie whispered confidently. Plus, we're in a military marriage. Breaking it is serious trouble. Richard felt a flush rise to his cheeks under Annie's gaze and instinctively looked away, but her calm and reassuring presence comforted him, easing the tension in his body. Richard thought back to the call and hesitated before asking, Annie, if it's possible, could you help me hide my tracks? I don't want her interrupting our life together. Annie's eyes lit up visibly at his use of our. If you don't want her around, I won't let her disturb you, she replied firmly. She handed him a cup of hot water. Was your stomach upset earlier? A little warmth might help. I'll check on our food. Eating should make you feel better. Watching the steam from the glass fog his vision, Richard's eyes grew misty as he saw Annie walking over to speak with the waiter. His nose tingled with emotion. When she returned to her seat, Annie cleared her throat to get his attention. "Do you have any requests regarding the wedding?" Richard didn't meet her eyes, simply shaking his head. The only person he truly wanted at his wedding was gone, so it no longer mattered how grand or simple the wedding was. None of it mattered now. Sensing Richard's low spirits, Annie leaned in with an apologetic tone. "Time is tight, and a military wedding might be simple. I'm sorry for that, but we should still invite those who matter. You once said your grandfather was the reason you got married. This wedding should be witnessed by him." Her words hit Richard like a punch to the gut. He hadn't expected Annie to remember his words. Someone else in the world still remembered his grandfather. Tears welled up in his eyes, and he began to sob like a child. But he can't come. They kept me from him. I got there too late. I never even got to show him our marriage certificate." His grief was overwhelming. Annie hugged him tightly, offering comfort. From his broken story, Annie pieced together the truth, learning that Jenny had kept Richard from seeing his grandfather one last time. This infuriated Annie. Despite soothing Richard, she secretly sent a text message. Meanwhile, in another place, a bottle clattered to the floor. Jenny sat on the ground, her face flushed from drinking. She downed another glass of burning liquor, clutching her head in agony. It was the third day since Richard left, and she hadn't found any trace of him. Although Susan had found his flight details, he hadn't checked into a hotel. Searching for him in a vast city like sea was nearly impossible. At first, Jenny was confident that Richard was just playing hard to get, certain that he wouldn't leave her. But as the days dragged on, doubt began to gnaw at her. "Richard, where are you?" she muttered, reaching for another bottle of liquor. A noise at the door interrupted her, and Michael's voice came in. "Jenny, you've had too much." Michael took the bottle from her hands, his voice filled with concern. "I know you're upset about Richard, but seeing you like this hurts me. I know your feelings for him run deep, and I shouldn't say this, but if you're going to love someone who loves you back. Someone who truly loves you wouldn't let you hurt yourself like this." Michael's subtle way of not directly mentioning Richard while constantly undermining him was clear. He was trying to imply that he was the one who truly loved Jenny, the one who valued her the most. But whether she was drunk or just lost in thought, Jenny didn't respond, keeping her eyes downcast. Emboldened by her silence, Michael leaned in closer. "Come on, Jenny. The floor's cold. Let me help you up." He was dressed up, with the top buttons of his shirt undone, deliberately showing off his toned chest. But as he reached for her, Jenny suddenly pushed him away with all her might. "Don't touch me." Stunned, Michael fell backward, his arms scraping against the floor. He stared at her in disbelief. "Jenny." But Jenny showed no concern for him, didn't even offer to help him up. Instead, she impatiently frowned. "I'll find you a new place. Move out and don't come back." Richard had never liked Michael moving in, and now that she was kicking him out, maybe Richard would come back, she thought. Michael couldn't believe his ears. Jenny wanted him to move out? Why? This was not how he had imagined things. He had thought that by driving Richard away, there would be nothing standing between him and Jenny. He should have been happy, but instead, his fists clenched in frustration and unwillingness. He wanted to talk to Jenny again, but she wasn't listening. She held her head and wobbled away, ready to return to her room. Just then, her phone rang in her pocket. It was Susan calling. "Jenny, we found Richard." All the alcohol-induced haze in Jenny's mind evaporated instantly. "Where is he?" she asked quickly. After that day, Richard had been staying with Annie at the military quarters. With their wedding approaching, they were busy shopping for countless things. "Next, shall we check out the bedding?" Sitting in the passenger seat, Richard pulled out a long list. "I had no idea preparing for a wedding would be this overwhelming." Richard didn't have any elders to rely on, and Annie had lost her parents early, leaving only a grandfather in Beijing. With no elder to help them prepare, they had to arrange everything themselves. And after 3 days, they weren't even halfway through the list. As Annie drove, she gave Richard a playful look. "Tired? I can handle the preparations myself. You could rest at home." Recently, Richard had gotten more comfortable around Annie, so he joked back. "I don't trust your tomboy sense of style. I don't want a room covered in Pepto-Bismol pink switch plates." Annie wasn't offended by his teasing. She raised an eyebrow and said, "See, That's typical. It's practical. Richard chuckled, looking out the window, feeling his stress melt away. After finalizing their bedding choices, Richard was about to head to the furniture store when Annie suddenly pulled him into a cafe. "Wait here. I'll be right back." With that, she hurried off, leaving Richard puzzled. He ordered a drink and sat by the window, waiting obediently. It wasn't long before he heard footsteps behind him. "Back so soon?" Richard turned around, surprised, but the smile instantly froze on his face when he saw Ginny standing there. She stood in front of him, her eyes red from crying, her hair messy, and her suit all wrinkled, looking nothing like the polished professional she used to be. Ginny didn't care about the stares from the other customers. Her eyes were full of eagerness as she moved to grab his hand. "Richard, I finally found you. Let's go back home." But Richard stepped back, avoiding her touch, and asked coldly, "Why are you here?" With that one simple question, Ginny felt like she had been plunged into an icy abyss. She stood frozen, not daring to move, shocked by his cold tone. After searching so tirelessly for him, she had always thought of Richard as just playing hard to get, but seeing his expression, she realized he genuinely didn't want her there.